Hey, welcome AP students. I wanted to start going through these FRAPPYs. We're going to start at chapter 1. We're going to go all the way through. We'll skip chapter 3 and come back to that as we're going through the text. We're going to hit on chapter 3 as soon as we finish with chapter 9. Anyways, I want us to go through and read through this FRAPPY first. It's always good to read through it, kind of determine how long each answer is going to take, consider what kind of things we need to do for each answer before we get started. Okay, as a general rule, that's something you always want to do, is go through, find out how long things are going to take you and be like, am I taking too long on this part of the problem as you're working on it? So, let's read the question. Using the data from a 2,000 sentence random sample, ooh, that's a pretty big deal, of 348 U.S. residents aged 18 and older was selected. Among the variables recorded were gender, male or female, housing status, to rent or own, and marital status, married or not married. All right, there's a two-way table that summarizes the relationship between gender and housing status, and we can see this right away. We can see there were a little bit more males than females who were surveyed, and a lot more own than rent their homes. And it looks like things are pretty similar between male or female that own and rent their homes. 132, 122. And that's a difference of 10. But if we look at their totals are a difference of almost 20. So a difference of 10 isn't a big deal whenever the total difference is about 20. And the rent, it's a difference of 6, which would give us the rest of the difference down there. All right, so just looking at that, we know a few big things about that. What percentage of males in the sample own their own home? Oh, that's a percentage of males. That's a simple conditional distribution problem. Shouldn't take too long. Then make a graph to compare the distribution of housing status for males and females. Okay, well, this one we're going to want to make a graph. We got to determine what kind of graph to make. So if I'm thinking housing status for males and females, it might be best to break this down into two main categories, males and females, and then inside those, side by side, have own and rent. And that way we can look at all of the data comparatively. So this is going to be a side by side bar graph. And rather than just a regular bar graph, let's actually go with a side-by-side relative frequency. Graph. Now the reason we'd want to go with this one is that showing percents gets a bigger difference between, you can see that difference a little bit more effectively. We're just looking at the numbers because they are 20 away from each other. Doing just a bar graph wouldn't be able to tell us all that much, but a relative frequency graph would. All right, if we go to part C, it says use the graph in part B, describe the relationship between gender and housing status. Okay, so we're just going to use that graph to get some results here. This is going to be a sentence answer, maybe 2 sentences to go through. All right. Now we've got D, two-way table summarize the relationship between marital status and housing status. Oh, this one is about marital status and housing status. A little bit different. If we look, there's a lot more owns than rents, and that was true in the one up above as well. But if we look at married and not married, the values on the bottom, 212 and 136, that is a much bigger difference than the one up above between males and females. Okay? There's a much bigger difference between married and not married. So this one might show us a lot of kind of a bigger difference in data. And it says, for the members of the sample, is the relationship between marital status and housing status stronger or weaker than the relationship between gender and housing status that you described in Part C? Justify your choice using the data provided in the two-way tables. Okay, so we'll go through this problem. We've got a good idea as to the amount of time each one will take, and I'm sorry I skipped kind of describing D. It looks like with D it might be effective to do another graph, and then to use that graph to come to a conclusion. D is trying to get us to the point of saying, okay, I don't need to give you the structure of make a graph, get a description. You should know that if I want to communicate something, I should be getting a graph and a description, doing something to communicate my reasoning. All right, so let's start up here with part A. And part A, what percentage of males in the samples own their own home? So if we look at males in the samples, there are a total of 182 males altogether. How many of them own their own home? 132. So 132 divided by 182. If I pull up Desmos and just do a quick division right there, we should be able to find out what it is. 132 divided by 182. And 0.7253. Okay, so that means, and I'm going to write this down in text. You guys don't always have to do this, but it's pretty effective to do sometimes. Just a second. All right, so I'm going to write it right down there on the side. And pretty simple answer. 72.53% of males in the study own their own homes. Own their homes. I don't know why I put own twice. Own their homes. Okay, so pretty simple first problem. Quick, easy to get through. All right, let's go on to the second part of it. Make a graph to compare the distribution of housing status for males and females. So again, we want to do a side-by-side relative frequency graph. So across the bottom, we're going to put males, males, and females. And I'm going to use two colors here. I'm going to use green, and that is for own. And I'll use purple for rent. Okay, so we've got own and rent. Males and females, there's one last thing we want to add, and that's percentages. Here we're going to start with 0. Here it's 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, and 1. All right, so males, females, own, rent. We're looking for the percent of males that own, the percent of males that rent. And what's nice is if you already got one, you got the other as well, because the remainder of them have to be renting if you know who owns their home. So for males who own their homes, we are at 72%, which gets right about here. So I'm going to go with 2 bars, go straight down there. That's the percent of males who own their home. Because 72% is how many own their home, that means that roughly 27.5% rent their homes. So that's the one I'm going to fill in next. 27.5%, right about there. Okay. I think I went a little too far. 27 would be close to 30, right there. Okay. Now, filling these in just to make it look a little nicer. If you have time, it's a good thing you can do. Boom. All right, so we got males there. I don't know if it actually ended up looking nicer. Now let's do females. We didn't calculate that right above, so we do want to calculate that down here below. So we have 122 out of 166. And just plugging that into a calculator real quick. 122 out of 166. And let me put that right down here. 122 divided by 166. Okay, and we have 73.49%, roughly 73.5%. So it's actually pretty close to the males. Okay, Actually, I think it's a little higher than the males, 73 versus 72. So it's going to go up 2 and just a little bit higher than that one, 73.2%. And then for those who rent, a little bit lower. That's going to be 27%. No, 26.5%. So just a tiny bit lower. Now, as you're thinking about these, oh, that's what I should do instead. Use my highlighters. Okay, as you're thinking about these, it would be kind of important for you to consider what you're going to be saying in the next paragraph, because you know what the question is. Okay, how do these compare? Does somebody's gender have any effect on their ability to own a home in this random study? And it definitely doesn't look like it, because males, 72% of males have it, 73% of females. That's not a very big difference. And so that's what we're going to write down in question C. Use your graph from part B. Describe the relationship between gender and housing status. So, from the graph in part B, we see that both side-by-side comparisons are similar. In addition, the percentage of those who own their homes their homes is 72.5% for males, and just to make sure, yeah, and 73.5% for females. Okay, this is not a significant difference between so we cannot conclude that gender has an gender, I would say, is related to someone owning their own home. Okay. All right. So question number 3, or C, that's what it was really asking for. We looked at those differences. We were like, okay, that's 72%, that's 73%. We can't conclude that that gender is related to somebody owning their own home. We're not looking for cause and effect here. These graphs don't give us any cause and effect. This isn't an experiment that tells us cause and effect. This is just a survey finding out if they own their home, if they're married or not married. All right, so let's actually go to D and talk about married and not married. Let me reread the question real quick for the members of the sample. Is the relationship between marital status and housing status stronger or weaker than the relationship between gender and housing status that you described in Part C? Justify your choice using the data provided in the two-way tables. Now, again, this would probably be really good to make a side-by-side relative frequency graph, and then we can really compare them. So if I come down here, and we're going to make another side-by-side relative frequency graph. Side-by-side relative frequency. Okay, this one doesn't have the whole grid set up, so I'm just going to set it up real quick. Get that flat part done, that nice little side part. We'll go 2, 4, 6, 8, and 1. 0.2, 0.4, 0.6, 0.8, and 1 should be a little bit higher. I'm going to fix that. And 1 right up there. Okay, and then we're going to split it up into those same two, or not same two categories as above, but we're going to compare own to rent right next to each other. Married. And let me change that to blue. Married. And not married. Okay, so married versus not married, and of course we are going to have light green for own and purple for rent. Okay, so we just want to compare these graphs. Now, again, we do need to do some quick calculations here, so I'll pull up Desmos real quick. Let's do own first. Okay, so for them to have owned their own home, given that they're married, we've got 172 divided by 212. And that's 81% are married. So we're going to go ahead and graph that right up there. All right, how about rent? Well, for renting, that's 40 divided by 212. Should be 19%, but let's just double check. 40 divided by 212, and yep, 19%. So a little bit less than 2, and I do want to change that to purple. Boom. Okay, and then for not married, we have 82 and out of 136. 82 divided by 136, we got 60% of unmarried people or not married people do not own their own home, or own their own home. 60%, which I went up just a little too high. That's what I get for being left-handed. Covering over the 60% there. All right, making that little table right there. And in addition to that, I do want to make this one should be about 40%, but let's double check. We've got 54 out of 136, yep, 39.7%, so roughly 40%. Right there, oh, and back down. So just shading these in real quick, make it look all nice. Okay, and then switching on over to this one, shading it in, boom, 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 boom. Okay, so we got married versus not married, and unlike the other graph, this graph shows some big differences. If we look at the other graph, they were roughly the same. Here, they're very different, so this definitely shows, okay, there is a stronger relationship between being married and owning your own home. And that's the conclusion that we're going to write, because remember, it says, for the members of the sample, is the relationship stronger or weaker than the relationship between gender and housing status? So we're going to start that off. Start off responding to this question in some sentences. From the data, we are able to see that 80% of married people in the study own their own homes. Own their homes. Where only 60% that were not married own their homes. I'm trying to say not own their own because that just sounds weird. So 80% own their own homes, but only 60 were not married own their own homes. That is a big difference. This is a, and I'm just going to do an 80% minus 60% equals a 20% difference. Much larger difference than the difference between gender and owning a home. That's 73% minus 72%. I guess you could probably round them up, which was equal to 1%. Okay, so it's a much larger difference than the difference between gender and owning a home. Thus, the relationship between marital status and owning a home is greater than gender and owning a home. All right, so I wanted to run through this with you, show you how to accurately kind of go through this to solve it. Think about some big, I don't know, I want to say starting steps in order to quickly answer these questions. Always read through the question first. Think about future questions as you're answering earlier ones. Now, there's one other thing that we could do, and that is on A, and this, I wasn't thinking about it at first, but what's the percentage of males who own their own home? We could put the percentage that somebody owns their own home, given that they're male. So we could have put that at the beginning. That's a pretty nice thing to put. It shows an understanding of how to calculate probabilities and the fact that you understand that this is a conditional probability. You make that clear right there. As always, you do want to add a sentence at the end of each question to show an understanding. All right, with that said, I'm going to bring this video to a close.